Thank you very much. I'm sorry you can't all be seated, but no matter, you'll survive. I do quite a bit of going around universities and talking about the passion of my life, which is Jesus Christ and the difference he can make to people. And I'm fascinated by the way in which students casually say to me, 4 of them did the other day, smoking cigarettes, we were all sitting outside, and one said, you can't believe the Gospels, they're fairy stories, written centuries later, texts so corrupt that we can't know what the original was like. And I felt if those same students were as uninformed and as dismissive about their chosen subject, they would never have got into the university at all. The reliability of the Gospels is an important question, and you bear testimony to it by coming to examine it today. Why does it matter? It matters for this reason. With great religious teachers like the Buddha or Muhammad or Confucius, it doesn't really matter to us today that they ever lived. It is their teaching that matters and has lasting significance. But it's not like that with Christianity. Basically, Christianity is not so much a religion, it is good news. It is good news of a person who claimed to be more than man and to bring God onto the scene of human history. A person who backed that claim with a matchless life, amazing teaching, a person who, his followers claimed, made forgiveness possible for everybody who would claim it by his death upon the cross. And moreover, they claimed that death was not able to hold him, that he was risen and that he's alive and that he's in business and people can meet him. I remember how astonished I was and how skeptical I was when I first heard that. But that is the breathtaking claim of Christianity. It's all about Jesus, and if you remove him from Christianity, you've got nothing much left. Christianity is a historic faith. That is to say, it's open to critical investigation about what happened 2,000 years ago. It's not a myth, it's not a sentimental story, but it is history. At least it claims to be history. What actually happened. And so the Christian faith is closely bound up with the record about this history, the contemporary record, the gospel records. And the question presses itself on us, are these reliable? So the first throws up a bunch of questions that are closely related. Here they are. The first one, can we trust the text of the Gospels? The answer is yes, that we can on 2 grounds. The first ground is that whereas we have only a handful of manuscript witnesses to classical authors like Thucydides and Tacitus and so on, we have more than 5,000 early Greek manuscripts of the Gospels, and not only in Greek but in other languages as well, 3 dialects of Coptic, Georgian, Latin, Armenian, and so on. Secondly, whereas the gap between what the chap originally wrote, the autograph copy, and the earliest extant manuscripts that we have is a very long gap in classical authors, 1,200 years between when Plato wrote and the first copy that survives, 1,300 years with Thucydides, 900 with Tacitus. It is a very different story with the Christian Gospels. We have manuscripts of the whole New Testament written within 100 years of when the first authors penned their copies. We have a fragment of John's Gospel written between 100 and 125 AD, so the paleographers reckon, and that's within 40 years of when John wrote it. It survived because it was found in the sands of Egypt, very dry place. There is in fact no body of ancient literature where there is such widespread attestation to the text as the New Testament, and where the gap between the original writers and the first surviving manuscript is so small. The text of the New Testament is firmly established. We have what they wrote. Second of this cluster of questions about reliability of the Gospels. Can we trust the date? Yes, we can. Intense research for over 200 years has produced, I would have to say, a unanimous verdict that the Gospels were written between 60 and 80 or 85 AD, if not a little earlier. By the 90s of the first century, they were being quoted as foundational witness to Jesus. Nobody could have added any material later because of the widespread of attestation of the gospel text throughout the ancient world. The idea that they were cooked up centuries later is simply ignorant. No other gospels were ever added to these four. These four accounts came from the eyewitness generation to Jesus. And if we wonder why they were not written even earlier than they were, the answer is that the first Christians were absolutely bubbling over with this good news about Jesus. They reckoned he was the Savior of the world. They wanted to spill the beans everywhere they went. And so they didn't sit down writing things. They went out telling people about it. And it was only when the first generation was beginning to die off that they committed the spoken message to writing for successors like ourselves. And it's worth noting that the New Testament is an entirely new literary genre. It's not history, although it has a lot of history in it. It's not biography, though it's got a lot of biography in it. It is gospel. It is good news. It is like the eruption of a volcano of people who had discovered life at its very best. Is there more to life for this than this? Yes, they reckon that it was. Question number 3, can we trust the authors of this stuff? Yes, again, for a number of reasons. Firstly, no books in world literature have been subjected to such prolonged and detailed criticism as the New Testament. And today their standing is as high as ever. I've spent much of my life in studying and in teaching the New Testament, and I think I can say that with confidence. They emerge from every test with credit, and that is good reason for us to pay serious attention to their picture of Jesus. Second thing I think about trusting the authors is that there is a remarkable harmony in the general picture that they present of Jesus. They're writing independently, though they have some sources in common, but they're writing independently, and it's quite clearly the same person that they're talking about. And when you read the Gospels compared with the stuff that's written in the 2nd century about Jesus, it's as different as chalk from cheese. The harmony of the general picture is impressive. Third thing I think about can we trust the authors is that when events in the Gospels excuse me, are checked with secular sources, they fit very closely. From Tacitus, Thallus, Suetonius, Pliny and Josephus. Those were 5 non-Christian writers that all write before 115 AD. We can learn some fascinating things. That Jesus existed, that he had disciples, that he performed miracles, that he was crucified by Pontius Pilate between 26 and 36 AD, that he was crucified in thick darkness at Passover time. We learn that he claimed divinity and said he would depart and come again at the end of time. He was the Christ, these secular authors say. He rose from the tomb. His followers worshipped him as God, and his movement spread fast through the Roman world. We find all of that in secular sources. The Gospels back it up, but of course they put flesh onto the bones. Another thing I think that inclines me to trust the authors is that they were very close to the action itself. Mark was the right-hand man of the leading apostle, Peter, and he went everywhere with him as his interpreter. Luke was the close associate of the greatest evangelist the ancient world ever knew, the Apostle Paul. Matthew probably wrote the Q material, that is to say, sayings of Jesus that are largely absent from Mark's Gospel, but are incorporated both in Matthew and in Luke. Maybe a written, it may be an oral source, but it's very, very close, and both evangelists draw on it. Probably Matthew wrote that. And John was a teenager, I guess, when he became a follower of Jesus, first of all, but he was very close to him, and he reflected for many years on his life before he wrote his gospel. These guys were reliable, they were alongside the action. And then you've got the survival of eyewitnesses. Remember, these Gospels emerged within 30 years of the events themselves. And there were plenty of eyewitnesses around, and that is helpful for assessing the reliability of the Gospels. Top New Testament scholar called Richard Bauckham has recently written a book called The Eyewitness Testimony to the Gospels. It's very significant, because if the Gospels were exaggerated in any serious form, somebody would have critiqued it. They always do when you put out something that is wrong. But there's not a sniff of any critique of those Gospels to be found anywhere. Nobody has pointed out any errors. And then there are other marks of authenticity. For instance, parables were used by Jesus, but they weren't used by the early church. Issues of concern to the first Christians, like the circumcision issue, the Holy Spirit, stuff about the church, all of this is notably absent from the Gospels, which gives us a strong sense of its reliability. They're not reading in stuff that came out later. And then some of the sayings of Jesus show that there is an Aramaic substratum to the gospel, and that was the language in which Jesus spoke most of the time. It was his mother tongue. And scholars use what they call the critical of multiple attestation. That is, that if a thing is attested in more than one gospel, they think it's pretty likely. If it's in 2 Gospels or 3 Gospels or 4 Gospels, their eyebrows go up and say, yeah, we can buy that. And of course, the most amazing things, like the feeding of the 5,000, is in all the Gospels. Multiple attestation indeed. And so when you apply this sort of stuff, it's not the evidence about Jesus that is at issue, but whether we will go where the evidence points. My last main question is this: can we trust the authors? Can we trust the story, rather? The story that they tell. Granted that the story was reliably transmitted. Granted that it was by people who were around at the time of Jesus. Can we credit it? And I suppose the heart of the problem resolves itself into 2 main questions. Was Jesus divine as well as human? And did he rise from the grave? Those are the 2 wacky great questions that come at us from the Gospels. Let's just look at those. I haven't got time to do more than headlines, but we should be returning to them in the course of the week. Was Jesus more than man? Well, remember that all this stuff arose in a Jewish context. And Jews were passionate that God was so great that you couldn't make any image of him, no picture of him, nothing like that, let alone to claim that he had come to indwell a human life. Judaism was the hardest soil you could possibly have come up with the idea that the divine has come into a human being. Not like the Greek world. They're perfectly happy to have love affairs between the gods and local good-looking girls, and they produced a hero like Hercules or somebody like that. Nothing like that. That's not the background of the Christian story. The background is Orthodox Judaism, and it was mind-boggling to them. It was the hardest thing they could possibly believe, that Jesus was more than human. But 7 things persuaded them. There was first of all his character, all the virtues and none of the vices known to humankind were in Jesus. And people flocked to him. He was immensely attractive. Nobody could fault his character. Secondly, there was his teaching. It was the most wonderful teaching that the world has ever known. Its profundity, its clarity, its originality, its authority make it unique. And yet, he was a carpenter, a village carpenter. Then there was his lifestyle. He taught the highest standards ever, and uniquely he kept them, unlike any other human being before or since. You look at great people like Nelson Mandela or Mother Teresa or somebody like that. There's always things in their lives which they regret. There is nothing in the life of Jesus that comes into that category. His lifestyle was amazing. He never needed to apologize. He claimed to an angry crowd on one occasion. He says, "Which of you can point to anything wrong in my life?" This is a deathly hush. Devastating. And then there were his miracles. They are well attested, and they were not clever tricks or anything like that. They were indications of who he was. They were illustrations of what he wanted to do in human life. When he fed 5,000 people, he wanted this to be a graphic illustration of the fact that the world is coming to an end. No, it isn't. A graphic illustration of the fact that he could be the one who could satisfy human life. When he healed a blind man, there was deep compassion for that guy, but it was also the undertone was, I can open eyes that are blind to the truth of God. And what Jesus did for those people, he can do today. Then there was his fulfillment of prophecy. Scores of Old Testament predictions were fulfilled in this man. And there's no parallel anywhere in human history to this intersect between predictions, some of them 600 years before him, all coming together in one person. Absolutely unique, his fulfillment of prophecy. And then his claims. He claimed to forgive sins. That's God's job. He claimed to accept worship. That's God's job. He claimed to be the judge of humankind at the last day, and that is God's job. He's as nutty as a fruitcake if it's not true. And then there was his death. The fact that such an amazing person went willingly to a terrible death, coupled with his explanation of it. He said his death was going to be a ransom for many. That is to say, a price for buying people back who'd got captured by bad stuff in their lives. And when at the Last Supper he said, this is a picture of my body that's going to be broken for you and my blood shed for you. His death for them persuaded them, and I guess the biggest thing of all was his resurrection. That was the thing that blew them away. And so let's just have a look at see if the evidence for that will stand up. I'm going to talk about that in depth on Friday morning, if you're free to come then. But the Christian claim largely stands or falls on the resurrection of Jesus Christ. That is a priori so improbable that there's got to be some powerful evidence if we're to believe it. Let's have a look at that evidence. I'll do so in length on Friday, but here are the headlines. First, Jesus was truly dead. Romans were expert at crucifixion. There is only one occasion when crucified people were ever survived, and that is that a friend of these men came and saw the Emperor Titus just standing there, who ordered their execution, and he asked if they could be taken down, and they were. And well, the first one was dead when he was taken down, and the second one died a few minutes later. It didn't happen. Jesus Christ was truly dead. To make sure, they stuck a spear in his side so that it went up into his heart. Secondly, the tomb was empty. Nobody denied that for the next 150 years. His enemies would not have moved the body? Of course they wouldn't. They'd spent 3 years trying to get him dead, and now they'd succeeded. They weren't going to screw it up at that stage. And then his friends, supposing they took the body and hid it somewhere and claimed that he was risen from the dead, they would never have done that. For one thing, no Jew ever believed that there would be resurrection until the day of judgment. For another thing, they couldn't get in because the tomb was sealed with a stone and with a seal, and there was a guard outside. And most important of all is the psychological impossibility of it. These guys went round the ancient world proclaiming that Jesus was alive and could be met and was in business. And they allowed themselves to be thrown to the lions, to be killed in all sorts of ways for this. You don't allow yourself to be killed for a hoax. You may perhaps be allowed to die for something that you're mistaken about. But they weren't mistaken about this. They were confident about it, that Jesus had risen, and that's why the tomb was empty. And then the church was born. It can be dated to Easter in 30 or 33 AD. Date is still argued. Not before that, not after that. But this faith, which now comprises, in theory at any rate, more than a third of the world's population, that's 2,000 years after the event, started then. What started it if the resurrection is not true? And then, of course, Jesus appeared. He appeared extensively, just for a 40-day period, to a wide variety of people to validate his resurrection. He appeared to James, who was in the same family as him and didn't believe in him, thought he was mad. James later becomes the leader of the Jerusalem church. Why? Because he appeared to James, so we're told. He appeared to Mary, his mother. He appeared to Mary Magdalene, his friend. He appeared to Thomas, the skeptical disciple. He appeared to all 12 of the disciples. He appeared to 500 people at one time, presumably in Galilee. And finally, he appeared to Saul of Tarsus. Jesus appeared. The empty tomb by itself would not be persuasive. The appearances by themselves would not be persuasive. Together, they are very persuasive. And of course, the other thing is, of course, lives were transformed and still are. Peter was transformed from being a bombastic coward to being a man of rock. Paul was transformed from being an enemy of the Christian faith to being its foremost protagonist. James was transformed from being a skeptic to being head of the Jerusalem church. The disciples were transformed from a terrified rabble to a fearless church. And today, there are plenty of witnesses in this universities to the fact that Jesus Christ is alive. If you have any relationship with Jesus Christ and that you believe in He's alive, will you please stand to your feet right now? Quick, 1, 2, 3. Thank you very much. Sit down. There are witnesses that you can talk to. He's alive and in business. So I leave you with this material today. The evidence is very strong, but as the philosopher Kierkegaard said long ago, and very wisely, he said, if an observer could keep as close to the teacher as a pilot fish keeps to a shark, that would not make him a disciple. Very true, isn't it? We think that seeing is believing. If only I'd been there, if I'd seen it, I wouldn't have believed. You wouldn't. Caiaphas didn't believe. Pilate didn't believe. Loads of people saw but didn't believe. What the Christian gospel is saying is that if you will believe, you will see. If you will trust, you will discover. I'm a married man. I trusted years ago before I ever saw what marriage was. I trusted. And now, from over 50 years, I have seen what it is. That is the order. And that is what many people stumble at. You need to humble yourself and to commit yourself and say, okay, Lord, I can see the evidence is strong. If you're really alive and in business, here I am. That's a wonderful thing to say. Very dangerous thing to say as well. But it underlines the fact that commitment is essential if you're going to find out for yourself. For the first followers, faith meant commitment on the evidence of what they'd seen alongside Jesus. For us, it means commitment on the grounds of what they wrote, their testimony. And that testimony, enshrined in the Gospels, has brought multi-millions to the conviction that Jesus is the Son of God. I would encourage you to pick up that little book called Uncover, which is just French for the Gospel of Luke. Pick it up. It's got some very good questions in it, as well as the text. Do take one away and read it. Have it by your bed and read a bit in bed at night and say to yourself, what do I make of this person? Does this look to me like a fraud, or is it real? So don't hesitate to take one of those away if you like. Because you see, this gospel stuff was written for a purpose. And this is what one of the writers said was the purpose. Let's have it up on the screen. You can't get it on the big screen, but you can see it on the little one if you've got good eyes. Jesus did many other signs which are not written in this book. He did them in the sight of his disciples. This is authentic stuff. But these signs are written so that you may come to believe that Jesus is the long-awaited Messiah, and that he is the Son of God. And not just believe in your head, but by commitment, through believing, through trusting him, you might have life through his name. Life more than this, as the sweaters all round you proclaim. That is what the gospel writers wrote for. Not just to give us some evidence, but to say, here is evidence on which you can commit yourself. And you will find that it is true. And you will grow in it all the days of your life. I bumped into somebody just as I was coming in today who said, yeah, she rolled up one of these things 2 years ago. Nobody invited her, just had a flyer, put it in her hand. She said, oh yeah, I'll come. And so from there, she went to a course that followed this, and from there she became to Christianity, and now she's a solidly established Christian. That's happened all the way down history. There are, therefore, on your table, little cards. Could you just pick one up, please, and a pen? Because I'd really like your help. We don't do this sort of stuff all the time. We want to do it better, so we would love some comments from you. It's just a comment form. It can be perfectly anonymous if you wish. Any comments that you thought on this event, good lunch, lousy speaker, whatever you like, put it down. And then there's two little boxes at the end. One says, tell me more. And if you tick that box, we'll invite you to a short course of actually looking at one of these fundamental texts about Christianity. It's a course that's had an enormous impact across the world, called Christianity Explored. If you would like to look into the matter, and I really challenge you to look into the matter, then tick that box, but remember to put your contact details, because it's no good having anonymous response forms coming back with that box ticked. The other box is this. It says, count me in. And there may be people here today who have been thinking about this for some time, but you've never really committed yourself. You haven't jumped. As it were, you've reflected on marriage to Christ, but you've never jumped into his arms. And it may be that you're ready to do so today. So if you are, tick that box that says, count me in. And we've got a short course to help you get stabilized in this new relationship with Christ after this week is over. So those are the two things. I'll just give you a moment to fill that in, and then I'll respond to questions that you have been putting in. Let's go for it. Just by the way, just leave them on the tables. We'll pick them up afterwards. Nobody's going to publish them. Can we have some questions? Yeah.
Thanks very much, Michael. Can I just add my encouragement to continue texting in questions? Hopefully you can see the number on the screen. I'm just going to start off with a couple that have been texted in. The first one, Michael, is how were the Gospels selected? What about the Gospel of Thomas, for example?
Thank you very much. The Gospels were self-selected. No committee ever sat down to select the Gospels. They just commended themselves by their authenticity. The Gospel of Thomas was never considered alongside the four Gospels, but it is pretty close to them. Some of the Gospel of Thomas we had already, and it came from the late 2nd century. The other part the remainder of the 114 sentences that make up the Gospel of Thomas came from a document that appeared in the sands of Egypt in the latter part of the 4th century. But some of the sayings in that are very close to the Gospels. Some of them are wild and wacky. You know, split open the stone and you will find it, and that sort of thing. And that if a woman wants to become a believer, she'd better become a man first. That's the last of the 114 sayings in Thomas. So you can see it's a mixture of good stuff and bad stuff. It never rivaled the Gospels in any way. Next question.
Thank you. Next question is, so you mentioned some secular sources that said Jesus was around after his death and referred to his disciples being with him, etc. And so what are these sources specifically? The person who texted in so they could perhaps look into that more.
Right. Can I just offer you this little book? If you're a guest here today, it's on the house. Take it. It's Jesus for Skeptics. You say, oh, I'm a bit skeptical about this. Do take this as a memento of today. And if you're a member of the CU, it'll cost you £2. But otherwise, it's on the house. To answer your question, what was the question again?
The question is again, so you referred to these...
Oh yeah, these secular sources. Well, I was conflating material that came from those 5 sources. Thallus, for instance, is a Samaritan writer, and we have his statement that a darkness came upon the earth at the time of the crucifixion of Jesus. And he was writing a world history from the capture of Troy to his own day in 50 AD. So it's absolutely fascinating that he should have put that in. And that was one of the things that I was bringing together. Tacitus is the best historian of the ancient world, and he tells us about Jesus being, the whole Christian faith coming from Jesus, who was executed under Pontius Pilate, and so on. That's Tacitus Annals 1544. And the other great source that I was quoting is Josephus' Antiquities 18:5, where he talks about Jesus being the Messiah and his disciples claiming that he was risen from the dead and the whole sect hasn't died out. And Josephus was desperately keen not to talk about this stuff at all for political reasons.
Next question is, what if it was all a cult and it just got lucky?
You know, you're not the first person to come up with that. There's a chap called John Allegro who on a good day, Mondays, Wednesdays and Fridays, shall we say, he was a serious Old Testament scholar with some interest in the New Testament. On Tuesdays, Thursdays and Saturdays, he was as mad as a hatter. And he argued that the Christian faith originated from magic mushrooms. That grew in Palestine. These were hallucinogenic mushrooms, and that this is where the whole thing, it was a cult that arose from this sort of thing. Well, my aunt was a specialist on these things in Kew Gardens, and so I wrote to the Daily Mirror to give a refutation of this view of John Allegro's, and sure enough they published it. Of course it is absolutely crazy for this very simple reason, that these mushrooms do not grow in Palestine. Next question.
Thank you. Can I take any questions from the floor? Yeah, over there.
Yeah, I take, well, obviously from what you were saying, you obviously take miracles to be historical events that actually happen. You accept that? So they're actually empirical events.
Forgive me, I don't feel 80 plus most of the time, but my ears do. So could you just say that comment again? Just say it for me.
So miracles are actual historical events, are literal events according to you?
Miracles are historical events, literal events.
Yes, I think they are. I mean, people have tried to explain them away by saying, for instance, that Jesus walking on the water, he was only walking on the edge of the water and his feet were getting wet, but the rest of him wasn't. You know, all of these sort of things were quite common in the 19th century. But now no serious New Testament scholar reckons that that is the case. There were historical events, at least they were attested as historical by the people who wrote them, and I've tried to give some reasons why I think that their stuff is reliable.
Okay, so the virgin birth, the resurrection of Christ, turning water into wine, all of these events that we know only from testimony contradict all we know about science, laws of nature. I think it was David Hume that said you should support your belief.
I'm glad you've raised that. That's a very
large claim that Christianity makes.
Yeah, it's a very important point.
And we only have testimony.
May I try and respond to that? Yeah. What the natural sciences are trying to do is to establish observed uniformities, and from that to draw out laws of nature by inductive reasoning to arrive at them. If, however, Jesus does bring God onto the scene so that we can actually see what he's like, if he does embody something of the divine in his nature, then this is not a series of observed uniformities. This is something from outside. And let me give you an analogy of what it might be. In a film, for instance, you have the people in the film all doing their stuff, but it is possible, isn't it, for the filmmaker to actually come in on the set himself and to be part of it. And that gives us some insight, I think, into what they claimed that Jesus is.
Can I just say one little thing? It's a matter of probability. What's more likely? Someone testifying made a mistake, or the laws of nature just on this occasion have been descended?
Yeah, what is more probable? I think we can't spend too long on this. Let's have a chat afterwards. But probability is all about the calculus of chances. And that is not what we're talking about when we talk about the claim that God has come in the person of Jesus into this world. The calculus of chances isn't going to help us. It either happened or it didn't. But anyhow, let's chat later. Thank you. Very perceptive questions, which I guess other people have been raising. Thank you very much. Anything else? It's 10:02. You've got about, nearly, you've got 9 minutes to get to the next lecture. Okay, well, game, set and match. Oh, there's one here.
Over there. Just going to say, where you said that they're widely attested by scholars, why are there still some atheist New Testament scholars?
So why are there some atheist New Testament scholars?
Why are there some atheists amongst New Testament scholars? The answer is that you can never compel belief. You have to commit yourself on what seems to be the best explanation of the phenomena. And I have to say that if you're thinking about people in the Jesus seminar, those are people who are on the fringe of New Testament studies. They are not in the core, and they are regarded with almost hilarity by serious New Testament scholars. Thank you all very much indeed. Do give us your comments, and if you would like to check either of those boxes, we'd love to follow things up with you. Thank you very much.